Welcome to International Definition. My name is Kenneth Freelain, and I'm going to be your host for today's edition of International Definition. Today on International Definition, we're going to feature the engineering tribute to the presidential inauguration of January 20th, 2013. Today, we're about to hear from Leslie Glustrom, and she is going to discuss a topic which is of major concern to the engineering profession. Leslie Glustrom is trained as a biochemist with an emphasis on the laws of thermodynamics and the movement of energy and materials through living systems. Inspired by the elegance of living things, and their ability to minimize the production of disorder by careful management, and of the flows of energy and materials, she has dedicated her life to trying to get human economic systems to incorporate the principles that have made life on this planet so remarkably successful. Leslie has over 30 years of experience working at the interface of science and society on a variety of environmental and public health issues. In 2004, Leslie resigned from her job in a biochemistry research laboratory to work full-time on climate change and clean energy issues. She is a co-founder of Boulder, Colorado-based Clean Energy Action, and she is presently serving as the Director of Research and Policy for that organization. Leslie has intervened extensively at the Colorado Public Utilities Commission and in several rate cases and resource planning dockets related to Xcel Energy. She works with citizens and organizations from many states on issues related to the cost and the supply of coal. She traveled around the country in order to speak about these topics. She has also played a key role in the effort of Boulder, Colorado to remove carbon from its supply of fuels. Leslie has won a variety of awards for her work on clean energy, including awards from the Colorado Solar Energy Industry Association, the Colorado Renewable Energy Society, Plan Boulder, and the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center. She has authored a number of reports on American coal supplies and coal costs, and she is a co-author of a Harvard study which is entitled, quote, Full Cost Accounting for the Life Cycle of Coal, unquote. This study was published in 2011. Leslie and her husband, Mara Glustrom, are the parents of 2 grown children and make their home in Boulder, Colorado. So now, let's hear from Leslie. Leslie, it's good to have you on the show.
Kenneth, awesome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate this opportunity. We have a large challenge ahead of us with respect to getting our country repowered for this century. It's a very large engineering challenge, but it's also a tremendous opportunity. And as we move forward with this challenge, we will unleash tremendous innovation in our country, and that will help drive a new wave of economic development that's really very exciting. So let's move forward and take a look at the United States electrical grid, often referred to as the most amazing engineering marvel that we know of. The fact that we can go almost anywhere in the United States and flick a switch and electricity comes on at every hour of the day and night, that's not something that happens all around the world, and we're extremely lucky to have that in our country. As we built this electrical grid in the last century, we designed it to operate primarily around fossil fuel plants. There are also hydro plants and nuclear plants, but About, on average, about 80% of our grid is from fossil fuels, coal being the dominant one, and increasingly some natural gas. We're going to talk today about the imperative of getting ourselves repowered and of understanding the role that these coal plants have played in keeping the United States powered with electricity, and of the imperative of repowering our country independent of whether you have any concern about the pollution or about climate change or any of the other issues that are related to the environmental and social costs associated with using coal. And for this talk tonight, we're going to pretend that there is no such thing as climate change, that this warming that we've seen since the 1970s and prior to that, the warming on the planet has no relationship to coal. That's clearly not the case, but the argument for repowering, the imperative of repowering our country, exists independent of whether you believe in climate change or not. The imperative of repowering is there independent of whether you are concerned about the warming that's projected for our planet. This is warming that we can see projected out through this century. We already know that we're seeing lots of extreme weather events, and as we heat up the planet and we intensify the water cycle, the dries get drier, the wets get wetter, and we see all sorts of things. But for tonight, we're going to assume that the floods that we're seeing all over the country have nothing to do with the carbon dioxide that comes out of our coal plants. That the wildfires that are frankly ravaging a lot of the western forests, that they have nothing to do with it. That the drought, where we had over half the counties in the United States in 2012 under drought conditions, we're going to pretend like none of that matters. We're going to pretend like the tremendous forest loss we've seen out west, where we've lost millions and millions and millions of mature trees to the pine beetles that are no longer killed off because the winters aren't cold enough. And so we used to have a lot of pine trees and only a few beetles, and now we have a lot of beetles and a lot fewer pine trees. But as we discuss the imperative of repowering tonight, we can even pretend like hasn't happened. We can pretend like the Arctic ice isn't melting much faster than the climate scientists have told us. We can pretend that the mercury that comes out of coal plants, many coal plants, 1 or 2 pounds of mercury a week being emitted for it to travel all over the planet, to accumulate in fish, to accumulate in hair, to accumulate in women who are pregnant and in their womb. I happen to believe that all of this is true, but the imperative of repowering exists independent of whether you believe it's true or not. We can ignore what happens when we create millions of tons of coal ash a year, and then sometimes when it's not stored properly, we have the kind of experience that we had a few years ago. We cannot think about the impact of the pollution that comes out of coal and the impact on our respiratory system and the impact on our circulatory system and the impact on our nervous system, as Physicians for Social Responsibility outlined in a report in 2009. We can ignore the fact that the hidden costs of energy total into the billions of dollars a year, as the National Academy of Sciences has told us. We can ignore the Harvard study that told us that when we account for the external costs of when we burn coal, that it conservatively doubles to triples the price of electricity from coal. And even if you don't believe any of those things, and you discount the National Academy of Sciences, and you discount the Harvard study, and you discount Physicians for Social Responsibility, and you discount the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change results, and our climate change scientists here in this country, we still have an imperative to repower. And while that can be somewhat frightening, it's also very exciting. This graphic shows us the coal plants in the United States. The size of the dot gives you a feel for the size of the coal plant. The bigger the dot, the bigger the coal plant. The colors of the dots tell you where the coal has been coming from. Dark blue is Central Appalachian, light blue is Northern Appalachian. Yellow, the coal is coming from Illinois and Indiana. We've got some kind of mustardy yellow color in Texas and North Dakota. That's lignite, the lowest form of coal, the dirtiest form of coal. The green dots in places like Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona is high quality Western coal. Those mines are playing out very quickly. But you can see that a large part of this country has coal coming out of Wyoming, and those dots are colored red. About 40% of our country's coal coming out of the Powder River Basin in Wyoming. And the reason we're going to talk about the imperative of repowering our country tonight, that's independent of all those environmental and health and social costs that most people believe come from the emissions of carbon dioxide. Most people are concerned about the mercury that's being emitted. But independent of whether you're concerned about that or any of your listeners are concerned about that, we have an imperative to repower our country and to get ourselves set for this century, just as our forefathers and mothers got us set for the last century. And this is a huge engineering challenge, but also a very exciting one. Just to kind of underscore that this repowering is an imperative, it's not a choice, it doesn't depend on whether you believe in climate change or anything else. And the fundamental reason that we need to get ourselves repowered is that U.S. coal supplies are much more constrained than is generally understood. Many people have heard that we have a 200-year supply of coal, and they're just absolutely sure that they know that. But the truth is, almost no one, and I've spoken coast to coast and a lot of places in between, almost no one has actually examined that 200-year supply of coal. And the truth about our coal supplies, if you were to examine it, you would realize that we are very quickly approaching the end of our economically recoverable coal. And that's the reason that repowering our country, there's an imperative. This kind of disconnect that's occurring in our country is because there's a lot of confusion about coal resources and coal reserves. This graphic helps you see that resources is a very large set, whereas reserves are the set of coal resources in our country that can be economically recovered, where when you mine them and pay the costs of producing those coal resources, when you sell them, you can sell them at a profit. And in general, coal reserves are a much smaller subset of our coal resources. There will probably always be a lot of coal underneath this country, but we won't be able to mine most of it because most of it is buried too deeply to be mined at a profit. And our old conception around coal is summarized in this diagram from 1997. It was put out by the Energy Information Administration. Unfortunately, the Energy Information Administration has been, in a sense, misleading our country. I don't think they're malicious. They just have not really been clear about how much of our coal is likely to be economically recoverable. And when people look at this diagram, they see things like numbers like 275 or 507, and those are billions of tons of coal. Back in 1997, we were supposed to have 275 billion short tons. We use about 1 billion tons a year. It's that number, which is now down to 258, that number is really the reason why people think we have a 200-year supply of coal. But that number is actually not the right number, and unfortunately, we've been working to get at the Energy Information Administration to publish the correct number or to change the way they publish this number. So far, we haven't been successful, but I believe we will be in not too long. If you dig deep enough into the Energy Information Administration's website, you'll find out that what they call estimated recoverable reserves are not really reserves. Again, reserves are supposed to be economically recoverable. And again, reserves are supposed to be economically recoverable. You're supposed to be able to mine that coal and sell it at a profit. And so when the EIA tells us that there's over 250 billion tons of estimated recoverable reserves, that should be profitable to mine. Unfortunately, if you dig down far enough, you can see where they acknowledge that the usual understanding of the term reserves as referring to quantity that can be recovered at a sustainable profit cannot technically be extended to EIA's estimated recoverable reserves. So they acknowledge that they're going to call them reserves, but they're not really reserves. This is a very serious problem for our country. And EIA goes on to say they're not really reserves because economic and engineering data to project mining and development costs and coal resource market values are not available. You have to know the cost of producing the coal, what it's going to cost to mine the coal, and you have to know what you're going to be able to sell it for to determine whether they're going to be reserves or not. And EIA doesn't have any of that information, and so they shouldn't be publishing this 200-year supply of reserves. And it's because that number is wrong that we have an imperative for repowering our country. The United States Geological Survey has actually done a serious study of how much of our coal is likely to be economically recoverable. And they've looked at coal fields from around the country, in Wyoming, in northern Appalachia, in central Appalachia, in Illinois, in Pennsylvania, in Utah, and in New Mexico. And as you can see from these numbers here, the amount of economically recoverable coal is typically less than 20% of the amount of coal that's there. Most of the coal in this country is buried too deeply to be mined at a profit to make it economically recoverable. Let's look at a little farther at this, and let's see where a lot of the coal in this country is. We already know that about 40% is coming from Wyoming. We can see that Wyoming just kind of dwarfs the other coal producing states. It's almost 3 times as much production as West Virginia, and then other states are much smaller than that. So we're going to spend a fair bit of time talking about Wyoming because that's where a lot of people think that 200-year supply of coal was supposed to come from. We can see that this is from 1990 to 2007, the coal production for the top 15 states. We can see that for the last 2 decades, the way we've been powering this country is by increasing the production of coal out of Wyoming. So this becomes very important to understand how long can we keep doing this? How long can we keep powering all of our shopping malls and all of our office parks and all of our tall skyscrapers that we're building? How long can we keep powering those with Wyoming coal? And the answer is probably not very long, and that's, again, leads us to the imperative of repowering our country. This is a coal production in Wyoming. We can see back in 1990 there was about 184 million tons being mined. Over the last 2 decades, that number has increased so that it appears to have peaked in 2008 at about 467 million tons. Since that time, production in Wyoming has dropped off. We don't know whether that production will increase again and we'll have a new peak, but there's good reason to question whether we're going to see a higher peak in Wyoming. So this is our largest coal producing state. It appears to be past peak, as almost all the other states also are. There's a few states we're not quite sure of, but there's good reason to believe we're past the peak of production. Means we've produced the easiest coal to produce in this country, and now it's going to get harder and harder and more expensive. I come from the state of Colorado. This is what's been happening in Colorado. In Colorado, it appears that we peaked in our production in 2004 at less than 40 million tons. And we're now down producing 25. I think this year will be in the neighborhood of 30 million tons. This happens, you bounce around. When exports go up, it might increase a bit. But again, it appears that we're past peak coal. That's very different than a concept of 200 years of coal, which so many people think they know but have never really examined. This is a graphic that we were able to get through, frankly, quite a bit of hard work, but all of the red lines in here are times when the major mines in Colorado were not functioning in the 2007 and 2008 timeframe. This is happening all over the country. It's kind of like driving an old car. You go out and you go to turn it on, it just doesn't work anymore. As we've mined coal for the last century and a half in a very intense way in this country, we've mined the easily accessible coal, and now it's getting harder and harder, and increasingly mines are declaring force majeure, meaning we had a major force and we can't produce the coal that we are contracted to produce, and you need to turn elsewhere. Because this coal is getting harder to produce, our coal costs have been going up. Nationally, our coal costs have been going up over 8% a year since 2004. Inflation is usually considered to be about 2 to 3% a year, so our coal costs are going up 2, 3, in some states 4 times as much faster than inflation. And this is why sometimes out here in the East you hear about quote unquote, the president's war on coal. It's not really so much the president's war on coal. Coal is getting harder to produce as the price of coal goes up. Used to be down around $1 a million BTU, and now it's between $2 and $3 a million BTU. It can't really compete anymore, and when natural gas costs drop, then natural gas is going to be the cheaper form of energy, or at least cost competitive. And so it's really not so much about the politicians' war on coal as it is about the fact that we have mined a non-renewable resource very intensively for 150 years, and we're coming to the end of that.
Well, isn't that what we've seen recently, where the price of gas has dropped and the supply of gas on the market increased?
That's such an excellent question, and that's a story that's been told a lot. If we think about it, now natural gas is in the neighborhood of $2 to $3.50 a million BTU. When coal was $1 a million BTU, that's no problem, because coal is still well below that $2 to $3 a million BTU for natural gas. We've had $2 and $3 a million BTU gas many times in our past. It was never a big problem for coal, because coal used to be $1 a million BTU or less in most states. So it's really the combination of the increasing cost in coal that's put coal up in the neighborhood of $2 and $3 a million BTU, and this drop, which many people feel is rather temporary around natural gas. We need to be looking carefully at our natural gas supplies. It's the champagne of the fossil fuels, and we should be conserving it. And respectfully, I don't think we should be risking our water supplies or our air in order to kind of try to get that last bit of natural gas. But the story that hasn't been told, it was told in the Washington Post in October of 2012, also on the blog called Grist by Dave Roberts, where you'll find lots of graphs. If you look up Dave Roberts' Grist blog on the increasing cost of coal, a story that's told less often is that coal is in trouble now because it's costing a lot more to produce coal at a time when natural gas costs have dropped. I put in a couple of states. Clean Energy Action has a report on our website that includes the cost of coal for every state, so anybody that wants to know what's going on with coal costs in their state can look up that report on Clean Energy Action's website. You'll find a graph like this for your state. I just put in Michigan, where we've been seeing coal costs going up over 10% a year since 2004. 2004 is an inflection point when our coal costs began to rise. Again, before that time, coal was typically $1, sometimes $1.30, $1.40 a million BTU. But we can now see in Michigan, we've more than doubled since 2004. It used to be $1.37. Now it's $2.81 a million BTU in the year 2011. May drop off a little bit in 2012 because of the competition from natural gas. But the fundamental driving force is that the fact that our coal mines are playing out. It's becoming much more expensive to mine coal. And instead of having a 200-year supply of coal, we have a much, much shorter horizon. When I'm being conservative, I talk about a 20-year planning horizon for moving beyond coal. I'm not even sure we're going to get 20 years out of our remaining economically recoverable coal. We could look at places like New York, where coal went from about $1.50 a million BTU in 2004 to over $4 a million BTU in 2011. When coal costs go above $3.50, somewhere in there, it's very hard to make coal plants really work economically. We had several coal plants declare bankruptcy in New York last year. Maryland, we've had some of the same sorts of things going on. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Leslie, it's been good having you on the show. I appreciate your presentation here. I'm glad that you were able to join us for today's edition of International Definition. Today on International Definition, we heard from Leslie Glustrom as she discussed a topic which is a major concern to the engineering profession. Leslie was participating in the engineering tribute to the presidential inauguration of January the 20th, 2013. And now, until our next broadcast, I'm your host, Kenneth Freelain, thanking you for joining us today.